Imagine waking up in your own bed. You know, you are 24 weeks pregnant, just trying to start your day.
Right.
You look out your bay window, expecting to see your quiet neighborhood, and instead, there were literally 2 military-grade helicopters hovering in the air.
It is completely surreal.
The FBI has completely surrounded your house. Flashbangs and smoke bombs start crashing through your living room glass.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the person you share a bed with, the person you thought was your quiet, safe, happily ever after, is involved in a terrifying shootout with federal agents.
I mean, it is the absolute furthest logical extreme of what happens when you take vulnerable people, put them in a pressure cooker of public scrutiny, and then completely abandon them.
Exactly. Good morning, babes, and happy weekend. By the time most of you hear this, it will officially be the weekend. So, babes, we hope you all have an amazing fucking weekend.
Truly, the highest of hopes for your weekend. May your coffee be intensely strong, and may your personal drama remain strictly on your television screen.
Yes, please keep it on the screen. Anyway, we need to start by giving a massive shout-out to Kristen.
We do.
Because Kristen slid into our DMs and asked us to cover this show, and we could not resist. Kristen, babes, because we are messy besties, we are here and fully ready to spiral.
Fully strapped in.
And babes, we are pretty sure at this point we got scammed of the merch situation. So sadly, no merch yet. But babes, we can send love, so cheers to Kristen.
It is a profound irony, honestly. We spend our time analyzing, the psychological manipulation of television networks.
Right.
And yet we're currently being outmaneuvered by some anonymous internet logistics syndicate. I mean, I have already started drafting the storyboard for the true crime documentary they will inevitably make about our missing hoodies.
I am still holding on to this desperate, unhinged hope. Like, I keep thinking I'm going to open my front door and the boxes of our beautiful merchandise will just magically be sitting there on the porch.
Like a gift from the universe?
Yes, like a gift. I literally check the tracking number every single morning. Why does chaos somehow always find us?
Well, because the internet is fundamentally designed to exploit optimism. The scammer recognized our earnest desire to provide comfortable loungewear, and they weaponized it.
They emotionally hurt us. They personally victimized us.
They really did. But we should probably pivot, because speaking of people whose vulnerability was systematically weaponized for massive financial gain.
Oh my God, the transition is flawless. We have to talk about the absolute madness that is Hollywood demons surviving 16 and pregnant on Investigation Discovery.
We finally got the expose.
Honestly, we always expected some kind of teen mom expose eventually.
Yeah.
I think anyone who watched that era of television knew there was a dark underbelly. And babes, we are glad it finally happened.
Yeah, it was a long time coming.
But I have to admit, I have a major grievance right out of the gate.
Let me guess. You wanted the heavy hitters.
Yes. I was sitting on my couch, completely ready with my snacks, and I realized we weren't getting interviews from the girls we actually followed for so long.
The original cast.
Where was Kaylin? Where was Farrah Abraham? Brianna? Janelle Evans? We wanted the truly chaotic women we saw on screen season after season.
Right.
These are the women who practically raised a generation of reality TV watchers, and they were totally absent from the documentary. It felt weird.
I get that, but let me push back on that expectation for a second. From a production psychology and, public relations standpoint, it makes total sense why the type-tier cast members didn't participate.
But why wouldn't they? It's their own story. If anyone knows the trauma of this network, it's them.
Because trauma is now a commodity, and they own the exclusive distribution rights to their own trauma.
Oh, wow.
When you reach that level of infamy, and let's be brutally honest, several of them have successfully weaponized their infamy into highly lucrative independent brands. You do not sit down for a basic cable expose where you have zero creative control.
That is so true. They have their own podcast now.
Exactly. Their own podcasts, their own social media empires, their own PR crises to manage.
Right.
Why would they give an independent documentary their most vulnerable moments for free?
Right, especially when they can just monetize that exact same story on their own platforms.
Exactly. Allowing a third-party producer to control the narrative edit is just bad business for them at this point.
Wow. Okay, when you phrase it like that, it makes complete sense. They are literally their own production companies now.
Yeah.
But it still sent me down such a rabbit hole.
How so?
Well, watching the documentary, I was realizing I do not remember every single person featured in this era. The sheer volume of MTV reality TV in the 2000s was an absolute overload.
It was constant.
How many Teen Mom spin-offs even existed? There was Teen Mom 2, Teen Mom 3, Young and Pregnant, Family reunion, next chapter.
It was a television industrial complex operating at maximum efficiency.
It really was.
They found a highly exploitable, infinitely renewable resource adolescent dysfunction, and they built a massive corporate machine to refine it, package it, and broadcast it to millions.
I am just so emotionally nostalgic about this era, though,
Yeah.
because I literally grew up alongside these shows.
Paul did.
I was experiencing all my own teenage emotional milestones, like my first breakup, fighting with my parents, figuring out who I was, and I was watching these girls go through the most extreme, terrifying version of teenage life on screen. I felt connected to them.
Well, you felt connected because the network engineered it that way. It was brilliant, albeit terrifying cultural anthropology.
That is such a good way to put it.
MTV wasn't just broadcasting content, they were shaping the sociological baseline of an entire generation. They normalized the presence of cameras during intimate, traumatic life events.
Which is so messed up when you think about it.
Right, which raises an incredibly important question about the current media landscape.
Exactly. Which brings us to a huge debate, and we need the Snark Squad to weigh in on this too in the comments later. What current reality show will eventually get its own dark expose documentary?
Because the cameras are absolutely still rolling right now.
You're still consuming this stuff every day.
Mhm.
It's going to be Real Housewife.
The Real Housewives cinematic universe is certainly ripe for legal and financial postmortems. I mean, given the sheer number of cast members currently facing federal indictments or bankruptcy.
Literally so many crimes.
There's a fundamental difference there. Those women are grown adults. They possess, at least theoretically, a fully developed prefrontal cortex and a baseline understanding of what they are signing up for.
Okay, fair. What about Mama June, Family Crisis?
Yeah.
Or Dance Moms? We already know some incredibly dark stuff has come out of the competitive dance world.
Dance Moms is definitely a strong contender for lasting psychological damage.
Or what about Love Island? Because the psychological warfare happening in that villa feels borderline illegal to me.
Oh, Love Island is a fascinating psychological case study. The producers intentionally isolate humans, systematically sleep deprive them.
And control their alcohol.
Yes, strictly control their alcohol intake to maximize emotional volatility. They manipulate their social standing through public voting and monitor them 24/7.
It's so intense.
It is essentially the Stanford prison experiment with better lighting and swimwear.
Oh my God, yes. That is exactly what it is.
However, if you want to identify the absolute darkest underbelly of modern entertainment, the genre that will undoubtedly face a massive catastrophic reckoning in the next decade, it is the family vloggers.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. The family vloggers make my stomach turn.
It's unregulated chaos.
The emotional manipulation of those kids makes me physically sick.
Because unlike the MTV shows of the early 2000s, where there were at least some superficial network guardrails like legal departments or child labor laws attempting to catch up,
Yeah.
family vloggers are entirely unregulated.
Right. You have parents who are intentionally creating chaos in their own homes.
Just for content.
Yes. They will literally sit there, crying toddler down, point a massive camera lens in their face and say, "Tell the internet why you're sad that our dog died."
It's repulsive.
Those children cannot consent to their most humiliating, painful, or vulnerable moments being blasted to millions of subscribers.
And we really have to examine the neurological impact that fame has on those parents. Fame fundamentally alters human brain chemistry.
Oh, it totally changes them.
Right. When your financial survival, your mortgage, your car payments, your lifestyle is directly tied to how much engagement and drama you can generate, you are financially incentivized to make your own life worse.
That is so dark.
You are incentivized to push your children to the brink of emotional collapse because the algorithm rewards high arousal emotions. In traditional television, producers manipulate the cast. In family vlogging, the parents have become sociopathic content directors of their own offspring.
We are absolutely going to see a wave of documentaries in 10 years featuring these kids who grew up with an iPhone shoved in their faces during every meltdown. It is going to be devastating.
Unquestionably.
And it really makes me think about the platform where this entire reality TV obsession started for us. It feels insane realizing we watched all these foundational shows on MTV, and now
Just a shell of itself.
MTV basically doesn't even exist anymore. Like the entire concept of music television is dead, but it completely changed pop culture forever.
I try not to be overly sentimental about the shifting paradigms of corporate broadcasting, but the structural change in how society consumes culture is profound. MTV was a monolith.
I am deeply emotional about it. Just think about growing up during peak reality TV.
Yeah.
Running home, dropping your backpack on the floor, and watching a Jersey Shore marathon.
ETL?
Yes. Teen Mom wasn't just a show we watched, it was literal cultural currency. If you didn't know what happened on the episode the night before, you had absolutely nothing to talk about at lunch the next day.
You were culturally irrelevant.
We would sit and watch music video countdowns on TRL.
That is the key difference, though. The communal viewing experience. Before algorithmic feeds siloed every single one of us into our own hyper-specific, individualized niches, MTV provided a unified pop culture moment.
Everybody was on the same page.
You didn't just watch it, you participated in a collective societal event. Everyone in your demographic was watching the exact same chaos at exactly the same time.
It totally triggers this massive nostalgia spiral for everything else from that exact specific era. Do you remember AIM and MSN Messenger?
Oh, I absolutely remember the profound psychological warfare of the aim away message.
Yes, carefully crafting your away message with obscure, highly emotional song lyrics to indirectly express your angst toward your crush, hoping they would decode it.
It was exhausting.
And the aggressive nudge feature on MSN.
I do miss the subtle, passive-aggressive art of signing on and off repeatedly, though.
Oh my God, yes. Just doing it over and over so a specific person on your buddy list would be forced to hear the door opening and closing sound effect.
It was our primitive version of a read receipt, just forcing them to perceive you.
Burn CDs. Taking a black Sharpie and writing Summer Mix 2009 on a silver disc that took you 3 hours to download off LimeWire while giving the family computer 5 different viruses.
A small price to pay for the perfect playlist.
Mall culture.
Yeah.
Walking around holding an Auntie Anne's pretzel, practically suffocating on the thick cloud of cologne they sprayed outside the Hollister store.
And going to Blockbuster on a Friday night, which actually forced you to engage in physical reality.
You had to actually walk around.
Right, you couldn't just endlessly scroll a streaming menu. You had to walk down aisles, look at the physical boxes, and if the new release was completely sold out, you had to compromise. It built character.
Facebook poke wars. Watching TV live instead of streaming, so you actually had to sit through commercials. Having a family desktop computer in the center of the living room so your parents could see the screen.
The absolute lack of privacy.
And waiting to call your friends until after 9 p.m. because the minutes were free on your singular wireless flip phone.
I frequently pretend that I am far too analytically evolved to care about this stuff, but the sociological mechanics of how we communicated back then were objectively superior.
Really?
Yes. We experienced delayed gratification. We experienced forced waiting. Now we just have infinite doom scrolling.
See, I knew you cared. You miss the messy 2000s just as much as I do.
I miss the structure, not the low-rise jeans.
Fair enough. And that is exactly why an expose on the show that defined that era is so compelling to us.
Whoa.
An expose. Babes, we are strapped in, seated, and have to discuss. It's time for Hollywood Demons, 16 and Pregnant.
Let's dissect this catastrophe.
The documentary opens with this wild setup, attempting to justify how the show even got greenlit in the first place.
Oh.
And we immediately have to talk about Dr. Drew.
Oh, Dr. Drew.
He comes in so hot, vehemently defending the legacy of the franchise. He talks about how before 16 and Pregnant even existed, he did an NBC special with Hoda Kotb called The Baby Borrowers.
A truly deranged concept.
Literally, the premise of this special was that they handed live infants to 16-year-old couples to see what would happen.
Which is an ethical nightmare. And what's fascinating here is that Dr. Drew actually admits in the documentary that a highly distinguished Yale psychiatry professor stood up at a town hall meeting and publicly stated that The Baby Borrowers was a terrible, dangerous idea.
A Yale professor.
Yes. The professor pointed out that human investigation committees, the ethical boards that govern psychological research, would never, ever allow an experiment like that because of the immense, undocumented stress the infants would be subjected to.
Right. An Ivy League expert is telling you, do not do this. But Dr. Drew's takeaway wasn't, oh, wow, maybe we shouldn't hand live babies to teenagers for television ratings.
Exactly. His takeaway completely bypassed the ethical warning. According to Drew, the professor then noted there was a pandemic of teen pregnancy happening in the country and suggested, likely hypothetically or sarcastically, that if they wanted to observe teenagers with infants, they should just put cameras in the homes of 16-year-olds who were already pregnant.
And Dr. Drew essentially thought, a brilliant sociological intervention.
Right. He took a sarcastic academic critique and turned it into a business model.
And he sits there in the documentary and claims this was all an altruistic public service announcement. Producer Felicia Stevens backs him up, too. She says they absolutely weren't glamorizing teen pregnancy.
Her defense was absurd.
Her exact quote is that the girls weren't in glam going to Turks and Caicos. She says they were in cheap T-shirts and shorts in a regular hospital, so therefore it wasn't glamorous.
The sheer audacity of this altruistic PSA defense is staggering. Let's unpack the logic here. Felicia says it wasn't glamorous because they weren't in Turks and Caicos. No, Felicia. It wasn't glamorous because they were living in abject, crushing poverty while your camera crew filmed them weeping over unpaid electric bills and a lack of health insurance.
Seriously.
You do not get a morality medal simply because your subjects are poor.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though.
Oh.
Didn't the teen pregnancy rate actually drop during the years the show was on the air? Is it possible they did think they were helping by showing how hard it was?
Well, that's the classic correlation versus causation argument. Yes, the teen pregnancy rate did decline during that decade.
Right.
However, attributing that massive sociological shift entirely to an MTV reality show ignores the concurrent rise in access to long-acting reversible contraceptives, increased comprehensive sex education in certain states, and the economic fallout of the 2008 recession, which drastically altered family planning behaviors.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense than MTV single-handedly saving the youth.
But let's look past their alleged intentions and look at the actual mechanics of this intervention. The documentary reveals the stark financial reality.
This is the part that literally made my jaw drop.
For their initial 16 and pregnant episode, these girls were paid a flat rate of $5,000. Now, for an impoverished teenager living in rural America, $5,000 feels like a lottery win.
Oh, totally.
But as the show transitioned into the Teen Mom spin-offs, those girls started making $25,000 per episode. And eventually, the top-tier cast members were pulling in up to $40,000 to $50,000 per episode.
And you see the immediate clash between that money and their maturity level. I physically gasped when Jessica, who went by Danielle on this show, admitted what she did with her initial $5,000 check from MTV.
It was so predictable.
She said she spent $2,500 on necessary things for the baby, like cribs, diapers, clothes. But then she took the other $2,500 and spent it on beer for house parties, half of her MTV check on beer.
It perfectly illustrates the profound ethical failure of the network's model. We have to look at the neurology of adolescence.
Brain development.
Yes, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the human brain responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, and understanding consequences, does not fully develop until around age 25.
Right.
You are taking adolescents with unformed prefrontal cortexes, many of whom have severe underlying trauma, zero financial literacy, and completely absent adult supervision, handing them thousands of dollars and expecting them to act like seasoned Hollywood professionals managing an investment portfolio. Of course, she bought beer for a house party. She was a child acting exactly like a child.
It is so messy and so deeply sad. And it forces us to look at the big picture.
Yeah.
If you dangle a $50,000 an episode carrot in front of vulnerable teenagers living in desperate poverty, is it an educational public service announcement? Or is it a reality TV Hunger Games?
It's the Hunger Games. The moment a financial incentive of that magnitude is introduced, any pretense of a documentary or a public service announcement evaporates.
Oof, gone.
You are throwing desperate people into an arena and implicitly telling them that the one who generates the most compelling, chaotic, volatile narrative gets to escape poverty. It becomes a manufactured survival of the most dramatic.
Speaking of volatile narratives, we have to talk about the Amber Portwood era. The documentary heavily focuses on the early seasons with Amber and Gary Shirley. And seeing the footage again all these years later, it is so much darker and more violent than my brain remembered.
Because when we watched it originally, the cultural conversation around domestic violence, especially female-on-male domestic violence, was significantly less evolved. Society was deeply conditioned to minimize violence when the perpetrator was a woman and the victim was a larger man.
The doc shows the actual footage that aired on MTV. Amber is physically assaulting Gary. She is aggressively slapping him, punching him in the face, and literally kicking him down a flight of stairs.
It's brutal.
And the messiest, most disturbing detail of this entire segment is the reaction of the producers. MTV just kept filming.
Let's unpack the bystander effect in the context of television production. The bystander effect dictates that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when there are other people present. But when you introduce a camera lens, it creates a profound psychological distance. The camera acts as an emotional shield. The camera operator and the field producer cease to view the event as real-life violence. They view it as content acquisition.
They just detach completely.
However, in this case, it crossed a massive legal and moral line. You have a crew watching an adult commit felony domestic assault while a toddler is present in the home. And the prevailing attitude was, well, we are documentarians. We have to let the reality unfold. It is grotesque.
I am absolutely horrified. I was yelling at my screen that the producers didn't intervene during a live domestic assault. Do you know who actually had to do something?
The audience.
The viewers at home. The documentary states that the Anderson Police Department and Child Protective Services started receiving floods of calls the day the episode aired. The viewers had to step in and report the child abuse because the multi-million-dollar television network completely failed to do so.
And that massive wave of viewer intervention is what ultimately forced the local prosecutor to act. The prosecutor subpoenaed the raw, uncut footage from MTV.
And what did they find?
What the investigators found when they reviewed the dailies was staggering. They discovered a third incident of domestic violence that MTV hadn't even deemed dramatic enough to air.
Wow.
The aired incidents were already enough for felony charges because the child was present, but the fact that there was a third unaired assault proves how incredibly routine the violence was during filming. It was their daily baseline.
The courtroom chaos that followed is burned into my brain forever. Amber was defiant initially. She tried to claim she blacked out and didn't remember hitting him. Then she violates her probation for possession of a controlled substance.
Things escalated so quickly.
She goes to court, asks the judge if she can take a recess to go to the bathroom, and while she's in the courthouse bathroom, she sucks the fentanyl out of multiple pain patches.
Right there in the courthouse.
She comes back into the courtroom, stands before the judge, and literally begs him to put her in prison. She says she knows she's going to die if she is left out in the world to her own devices.
It is arguably one of the darkest, most raw moments in reality television history. Despite her intense struggles, she correctly and astutely diagnosed that she needed institutional incarceration just to survive her own addiction.
She knew she needed the walls to save her.
But if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the sheer hypocrisy of the network is astounding. When the criminal investigation started, MTV instituted a formal safety protocol. They mandated that a qualified professional security guard had to be present whenever Gary and Amber were filming together or whenever Amber was with the baby.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this right.
Yeah.
They used network money to hire a bodyguard to protect Gary and the baby from their own cast member.
Exactly. They explicitly acknowledged via corporate policy that she was an active physical threat requiring professional mitigation.
Unbelievable.
And yet, after she served her time in prison, what did MTV do? They invited her right back onto the network. They paid her hundreds of thousands of dollars to continue being a marquee reality star.
It's disgusting.
The dark irony is staggering. They recognized the danger, mitigated it with security, and then continued to directly profit off the person causing the danger.
It is so gross. It makes me feel sick knowing how much we consumed this as casual entertainment when we were younger. And the producers actually admitted in the documentary that this wasn't accidental. There was a literal handbook on how to exploit this specific type of trauma for casting.
The formula.
Yes, the formula.
The producers recognized very early on in the development process that normal, well-adjusted teenagers who are handling an unexpected pregnancy responsibly do not make for compelling television. You need stakes. You need structural instability.
They admitted that to get cast on the show, you needed to check certain demographic boxes. It helped if your parents were teen parents themselves, proving a cycle. It helped if someone in the household was an active addict. It helped if you had a severely absent parent.
All the vulnerability.
They intentionally targeted the most vulnerable, unprotected girls possible.
They cast for generational trauma. Let's call it what it is. They were strip mining for trauma.
Strip mining, wow.
A mining company looks for land rich in natural resources, extracts the valuable material, refines it, sells it, and leaves an ecological ruin behind. MTV looked for girls rich in dysfunction. They extracted the drama, refined it in the editing bay, sold it to advertisers, and left behind devastated lives. Because casting vulnerable girls living in extreme poverty guarantees chaos, and chaos guarantees ratings.
Which brings us to Aaliyah's story from Season 5. Hearing her talk just shattered my heart into a million pieces. Aaliyah had type 1 diabetes, which made her pregnancy incredibly high risk right from the start. But her background, she went to juvenile detention for 3 years, and that is where she met her baby daddy.
And her home life was incredibly unstable.
And her mother struggled with severe drug addiction her whole life.
Aaliyah shared that her mother actually got her life together for a period of time but then suffered a relapse. Aaliyah recounted getting a phone call from her mom's coworker telling her they found her mother dead in a crack hotel from a massive cocaine and fentanyl overdose.
I'm getting emotional just thinking about Aaliyah describing falling to the floor in the fetal position, screaming at her mom for leaving her, and what happened after the MTV show ended.
Complete devastation.
Aaliyah says she ended up entirely homeless. She had 4 kids by 3 different men. She was sleeping in her truck in 20-degree weather. And she said this detail that I cannot get out of my head. She learned that hospital parking lots were the safest places to sleep in her car at night.
That is just bleak.
Because they block the wind, there's security walking around so random people leave you alone, and most importantly, she wouldn't get her kids taken away by CPS if they were parked at a hospital. Hospital parking lots.
It raises an incredibly important question about the fundamental premise of the franchise that we discussed earlier. Dr. Drew and the producers adamantly claim the show was an educational public service announcement to prevent teen pregnancy.
Right.
But if the star of your educational PSA ends up homeless, sleeping in a freezing truck with 4 children to hide from Child Protective Services, how exactly did the education of your show help her?
It didn't. It didn't. The intervention was entirely self-serving for the network. It provided a temporary, tiny injection of cash, a massive wave of public scrutiny that likely alienated her from her community, and then abandoned her back into the exact same systemic poverty and trauma she started in, only now she was famous and destitute.
Exactly. It didn't help her at all. And Sabrina's story is just as heartbreaking and proves your point about structural instability. Sabrina talked about her childhood before the show even found her. At 5 years old, she was feeding her younger siblings canned Vienna sausages for dinner because her mom was completely absent. 5 years old.
That is parentification at its absolute most extreme. A kindergarten-aged child managing the dietary survival of a household.
And it gets so much worse. When Sabrina was 7 years old, she was in the car with her mom. Her mom gets pulled over for speeding. And because the mom was driving drunk with open containers of alcohol in the car, little 7-year-old Sabrina unbuckled her seatbelt and sat on top of a case of beer in the backseat to try and hide it from the police officer.
That is incredibly dark. The cops took Sabrina away right then and there.
That is the foundation these girls were standing on before MTV ever knocked on their door. The trauma was so deeply embedded in their neural pathways. Now, MTV did not invent their trauma. We have to be clear about that.
Right.
But they certainly utilized it for marketing. They capitalized on the profound tragedy of their circumstances to sell ad space to proactive and herbal essences.
Which perfectly sets up what I think is the absolute lowest, most grotesque, most unforgivable thing I have ever heard a television network do.
Mm-hmm.
We have to talk about Christina and Todd from East Texas.
This is where we examine the mechanics of reality TV public relations operating at their absolute worst.
Yes.
The complete commodification of human grief.
Christina gets pregnant her junior year of high school. She's 17. She comes from a poor background and has never been on a vacation in her entire life. She's about 12 weeks pregnant, and she goes to the beach with her boyfriend Todd, who is the baby daddy. It's supposed to be this happy milestone moment.
A rare moment of levity.
Exactly. They go out in the water, and Christina gets caught in a massive, violent riptide. She swallows salt water. She blacks out. The lifeguards have to physically pull her out of the ocean, and she's rushed to the hospital, literally fighting for her life and the life of her unborn baby. And when she finally wakes up and looks around the hospital room, Todd isn't there. Todd drowned in the ocean.
It is an unfathomable tragedy, a completely senseless, horrifying accident that would break any adult, let alone a 17-year-old child.
And here is the expose energy we promised you. Christina claims in the documentary that when she initially applied for the show, MTV was lukewarm on her. They told her she was a bit too boring.
Not enough stakes.
They didn't think she had enough drama for television, but the second she called her field producer to tell them that Todd died and she probably couldn't film anymore, MTV completely changed their tune. They practically rushed a camera crew down there to film her grief.
Let's look at the psychology of a network producer in that exact moment. You are tasked by your corporate superiors with finding compelling, high-stakes television. A pregnant teenager whose boyfriend just tragically drowned is, from a purely cynical, narrative-driven standpoint, absolute gold.
Gold.
It is highly emotional, it is deeply tragic, and it guarantees massive viewer engagement. So their hesitation regarding her lack of drama vanished instantly.
But the way they handled the PR leading up to her episode is what makes me so furious. Before her episode even aired on television, Christina went to her local Walmart, and she looks at the checkout aisle, and she sees her own face and Todd's face staring back at her on the cover of a massive tabloid magazine. And the headline heavily implied that Christina murdered Todd in the ocean.
Which is legally and morally abhorrent.
But think about the logistics. Since the public didn't even know who Christina was yet because her episode hadn't aired, there's literally only one explanation. We were wildly speculating here, but come on. An MTV insider or a PR producer had to have leaked that story to the tabloids to drum up ratings for her upcoming episode.
It is a standard reality TV PR mechanic. We see this ecosystem constantly. Networks routinely leak half-truths, blind items, or sensationalized summaries of upcoming episodes to tabloids or blogs to build anticipation.
Right.
They treat real-life events like movie trailer drops, but to leak a story that implies a grieving, pregnant teenager murdered the father of her child in a riptide, it transcends standard PR maneuvering and enters the realm of the grotesque.
It's evil.
They commodified her deepest trauma and weaponized it into a cheap murder mystery for a magazine cover just to ensure eyes were on the screen when her episode debuted.
I am so angry on her behalf. How do you look at a 17-year-old girl who just lost the absolute love of her life, who's carrying his child, and think, let's make her look like a murderer to get our demo up in the 18 to 34 bracket?
It conclusively proves that the subjects are not viewed as human beings by the apparatus that films them. They are assets. And in the corporate world, assets are to be leveraged for maximum return on investment, regardless of the collateral damage.
It is so incredibly dark. And unfortunately, that darkness extends directly into how the internet treated these girls. Let's unpack the chaotic story of Jessica, who went by Danielle on the show.
This segment of the documentary was a stark illustration of how internet infamy violently accelerates personal destruction.
Viewers on Reddit actually did some digging and pointed out a detail about Danielle's background that the MTV show completely glossed over. Her stepdad used to beat her violently. He was physically and verbally abusive and even went to jail for punching her in the face.
So she was traumatized before MTV even arrived.
She was already set up for a life of severe trauma and hypervigilance before the cameras even turned on. And then the episode airs, and she is hit with a tidal wave of online hate and fat-shaming from viewers.
She talked about the internet, calling her a fat cow, a whale, relentlessly criticizing her makeup, her clothes, her personality. And we have to contextualize the era.
Right, 2011.
This was around 2011. Social media was just becoming a ubiquitous, unavoidable force, but the guardrails didn't exist yet. These girls were completely untrained on how to handle being public figures. There was no media training, no mental health support, no crisis PR team provided by the network to help them navigate becoming the target of thousands of strangers' vitriol. They were just fed to the wolves of the comment section.
And how did she cope with that relentless hate? She admits she turned to partying. The partying escalated to taking Xanax, then Percocet, and eventually at 17 years old, someone shot her up with heroin.
It's a tragic escalation.
And this is where my jaw was permanently on the floor. In 2012, she's in the back of her best friend's car at a McDonald's drive-thru at 2 in the morning, and she overdoses on heroin.
And because this was 2012, well before Narcan was widely available over the counter or carried by regular citizens, the situation became instantly life-threateningly critical.
Her friend, who she was supposed to trust with her life, refuses to call 911 because she doesn't want the cops to show up and bust them for drug possession.
Self-preservation above all else.
So instead of calling an ambulance and getting paramedics there in 3 minutes, the friend decides to just drive her to the hospital herself. During the drive, Jessica is actively choking on her own tongue.
Horrifying.
By the time they finally get to the emergency room, she is completely black and blue, deprived of oxygen, and the doctors have to tell her family she is likely going to be brain dead. I gasped. The absolute, unimaginable betrayal of that friend. To risk your best friend dying a painful, agonizing death in your back seat just to avoid a possession charge.
When an individual is steeped in the world of severe opioid addiction, the physiological need to avoid withdrawal and incarceration creates a survival mechanism that overrides every other human instinct, including loyalty, friendship, and basic empathy.
That is terrifying.
It's horrifying to witness, but it's the grim, predictable reality of severe addiction. And speaking of the reality of addiction, Jessica claimed that prior to the overdose, she was a functioning addict. She justified her extreme drug use by saying she still maintained a job, a house, and a car, and fed her son.
Wait, can we pause on that? She said she was a functioning heroin addict at 17. Is that even a real thing?
It is a fascinating, deeply tragic psychological defense mechanism. The concept of a functioning heroin addict who is a teenager, working a normal job, maintaining a lease, and raising a toddler is a statistical impossibility over any long timeline. Heroin is not a drug that allows for high-functioning domesticity.
Right.
The financial mathematics alone don't work. How does a teenager afford a daily heroin habit, rent, a car payment, and childcare on a basic hourly wage? They don't. The cognitive dissonance required to believe you are functioning while shooting heroin in a McDonald's drive-thru is immense.
Because she was feeding him.
She admitted herself that while her son was physically fed, she was completely emotionally absent. The facade of functioning is just the addiction protecting itself from intervention.
That makes total sense. She was surviving, not functioning.
Yeah.
And the most shocking reveal of this entire documentary happens when she actually wakes up from her coma. She survives, miraculously isn't brain dead, and her family is standing around her hospital bed. And the doctors tell her she is 4 weeks pregnant with baby number 2.
You survive a near-fatal heroin overdose that severely deprived your brain of oxygen, only to discover you are pregnant. The biological and physiological stress on that fetus during the overdose and the subsequent medical interventions is terrifying to contemplate.
It's an absolute miracle that baby Jaylee was born healthy in 2013. Jessica says she got clean after that incident, never touched heroin again, and considers Jaylee her miracle baby. I really truly hope she has stayed clean and found peace, but the chaos of that timeline is just staggering to comprehend.
It represents the absolute extreme of the life or death stakes these young women were navigating entirely on their own. But if we want to talk about the most insane, absolute left-field twist of the entire documentary, a twist that legitimately shifts genres from reality TV to a political thriller, we have to talk about Savannah Mooney.
When I say I was screaming at my television, this was the wildest thing I have ever heard on an investigation discovery show. Okay, let's set the stage for everyone. Savannah was on season 5. Her episode heavily featured her belligerent alcoholic mom coming home drunk, screaming, slamming doors, and terrifying her little brother, all while the MTV cameras just stood there and filmed it.
Right.
Savannah actually called the cops on her own mom during the episode to try and get help, and the cops did nothing. They refused to intervene or even call CPS.
Which, again, highlights the catastrophic failure of structural institutions to protect vulnerable minors. The police look at an intoxicated, hostile guardian acting erratically with an infant in the house and essentially shrug their shoulders.
So fast forward 8 years after her MTV episode aired. Savannah has broken up with her baby daddy, Stone. She went through a series of abusive relationships, bouncing from place to place, just trying to survive. But then, she thinks she has finally found her happily ever after with a new man named Jonathan Odell.
The alleged safe harbor.
He has manners, he doesn't yell at her, he's put together. She is pregnant with Jonathan's baby, a little girl named Zoe. They are living together in a house. She is 24 weeks pregnant.
And then her reality fractures in the most violent, unpredictable way imaginable.
She wakes up on the morning of October 7th. She looks out her big bay window and sees military personnel in her yard. There are 2 helicopters circling in the air. Every federal agency you can imagine is surrounding her house. Suddenly, FBI flashbangs and smoke bombs are crashing through her windows into the living room.
What unfolds next is a literal combat scenario inside a residential home.
Jonathan's friend, who is living with him in the house, comes out of his bedroom, dressed as a full tactical bulletproof vest.
Yeah.
Jonathan lays on top of Savannah in the hallway to physically protect her from the chaos. The friend with the vest starts shooting out the bay window directly at the FBI.
This is completely unhinged.
He shoots 11 times, actually cracking the bulletproof window of the FBI's armored Bearcat vehicle. Savannah thinks she's going to die right there on the floor. She says a prayer, says goodbye to her unborn baby, and when there is a brief, terrifying pause in the gunfire, she jumps up, runs out the front door with her hands up, and screams at the FBI not to shoot her because she is 24 weeks pregnant.
And we must be extremely clear and impartial here, strictly reporting the objective facts as the documentary and the Department of Justice presented them.
Right, just the fact.
The reason for this massive, unprecedented federal raid was that Jonathan Odell and his friend were part of a self-named extremist group called the Second Amendment Militia. According to the federal authorities, they were actively planning to travel to the United States border to shoot immigrants.
Oh, wow.
For these actions and for the subsequent shootout with federal agents, Jonathan was convicted and sentenced to 165 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole.
Just stating the objective facts.
Yeah.
That is the DOJ record of what happened. But emotionally, I am losing my mind trying to comprehend this.
Yeah.
How do you share a bed with someone, build a life with them, get pregnant by them, and have absolutely no idea they're in a militia planning mass violence?
It's hard to grasp.
Savannah says if there were red flags, she missed them entirely. How do you miss that?
It brings us directly back to the psychological profiling of reality TV casting and the long-term effects of trauma.
Yeah.
We have to examine what I call the trauma radar.
Trauma radar.
Yes. The women who end up on these shows, due to their highly traumatic backgrounds and severe lack of modeled healthy relationships, often have profoundly broken radar when it comes to evaluating romantic partners. Their radar is calibrated to detect massive, overt explosions. Savannah grew up with a volatile, screaming, alcoholic mother and physically abusive boyfriends. Her baseline for danger was people throwing things and screaming in her face.
So because Jonathan wasn't screaming at her, she thought she was safe.
Precisely. When Jonathan came along and used his manners, didn't yell, and seemed put together, her baseline for a good partner was so incredibly low that she mistook the absence of overt screaming domestic violence for safety. Her radar was looking for explosions, so she completely missed the quiet, deadly carbon monoxide leak of radicalization.
Wow.
She missed the signs of an extremist militia because she was just profoundly grateful he wasn't throwing plates at her head.
That is so deeply tragic when you explain it like that. Her brain just didn't know what to look for. Savannah was cuffed and thrown in the back of the armored Bearcat for 2.5 hours in the freezing cold before they finally told her she wasn't under arrest.
Unbelievable trauma.
She spent the next 1.5 years bouncing from place to place with her daughter. Zoe has never met her father, except through pixelated video chats from federal prison. Savannah said something so profound at the end of her interview. She said she realized that no amount of love from strangers on the internet and no amount of fame from being on MTV could fill the massive void she was trying to fill.
Which is the core beating tragedy of the entire 16 and pregnant apparatus. These girls sought out the cameras hoping the money and the attention would act as a magical salve to heal their generational trauma and poverty. But fame is not therapy.
No, it's not.
Money without financial literacy or structural support is just a temporary bandage over a bullet wound. And the internet is a cruel, unforgiving audience that ultimately demands blood sport.
It is so heavy. Which leads us to a final, incredibly provocative thought for you, our amazing Snark Squad, to mull over this weekend. We've spent this entire discussion tearing apart the MTV executives, Dr. Drew, and the producers in the boardroom who ruthlessly profited off of generational trauma and cast vulnerable teenagers into chaos.
Right.
But we have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, is the true Hollywood demon the executives? Or is it us?
It's the ultimate uncomfortable mirror. Television networks do not produce expensive content that lacks an audience. They are entirely ruthlessly driven by market demand.
We commanded it.
The documentary explicitly discusses the psychology of hate watching. Studies show that for every 1% increase in hate-filled comments on social media, there is a massive, measurable boost in viewership for the following episode. Hate is a far stronger driver of ratings than love because outrage engages the amygdala more intensely than joy.
Did our appetite for drama, our desire to sit on our couches and judge these girls, and our weekly viewing parties fund the entire machine? Did our comments, our views, and our insatiable need for messy reality TV create the very monsters we love to dissect?
We fed the machine?
Are we the Romans cheering in the Colosseum while people destroy their lives for our entertainment?
The executives built the arena, and they certainly profited from it, but the audience bought the tickets and cheered for the blood. The reality TV industrial complex only exists because our collective sociological desire to observe dysfunction pays the bills. We are all complicit in the ecosystem.
I'm going to be thinking about that all weekend. I need to process that. Snark Squad, thank you so much for hanging out with us and navigating this absolute chaos. We need to hear from you directly down in the comments. You, yes, you, listening right now.
We require your data and your opinions to feed our own content machine.
Tell us, which MTV show defined your childhood? Was it TRL, Next, Date My Mom, or Jersey Shore? What current reality show deserves a dark expose next? What from the early 2000s makes you the most nostalgic? And the ultimate question, should MTV make a reality TV comeback, or should it stay dead and buried in the past?
Please leave your detailed sociological dissertations in the comments. We genuinely read them all.
And babes, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe to keep our snarky little community thriving. We love you so much. Stay nostalgic, stay messy, and we will see you on the Snark side.